Well, I'm delighted to welcome Lord Vernon Coaker live from the House of Lords in Westminster. Welcome, Lord Vernon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good to see you.
And I'm delighted to have him on here as our guest on the Scotland Against Modern Slavery podcast. A man with a very distinguished political career, coming from very humble backgrounds, a background in teaching, Lord Coaker, if I understand rightly.
Yes.
Okay, I can see that in your demeanour. I'm not going to cross any.
No.
But
my father was a police officer as well, Sean. So the short hair comes with both teaching and my father being a police officer. So
there you go. Well, you learn something new every day. Lord Vernon Coaker, you were a MP for a number of years. You know, you came in this sweep that changed the nation back in '97 when Tony Blair's government came into power, and you stayed there for a long, long time. A couple of ministerial positions as well, isn't that right?
Exactly, yeah. So I was first elected in 1997, as you say, under the Blair landslide of those years, and then left Parliament in 2019 when the result for the Labour Party was a little bit different to 1997. But as you say, managed to had the privilege of holding some ministerial offices, in particular with respect to Scotland Against Modern Slavery in the Home Office back in 2006 until 2009, much of when the initial work started on some of the work around modern slavery, which seems an awful long time ago now.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that was, well, that's kind of start of where I want to go with this conversation, because and take away any party affiliations, you're seen across the four nations as a leading light in the movement against anti-human trafficking. You've been very outspoken in Parliament. You know, you have it seems to be a real personal drive in yourself that's pushing this in the agenda. You're also an honorary professor, is that right, at University of Nottingham?
University of Nottingham, yeah. In the Rights Lab there, which is a research body within the University of Nottingham, which is dedicated to research into modern slavery, into trafficking, looking at what's going on, the new ways in which it manifests itself, and the University in Nottingham works with colleagues across the whole of the UK, but obviously has many partners abroad as well. So it's very interesting to do that work there and that research there. And I mean, you'll know again from the work that you do in Scotland that with the universities there, but also the businesses and voluntary organisations, local authorities, and indeed the Scottish Government, that the evidence and research is crucial. We all want to do something about it, but how we do that, what the public policy response should be, I think is something that has certainly always, been at the forefront of what I'm about, and in particular looking at it always from a victim's perspective, and understanding that how difficult it is for them, and we'll no doubt talk about this, Jean, but the difficulty of prosecutions and convictions when it's the victims you have to get the evidence from in many respects.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And do you know what? I don't think there's a more opportune time to talk about that then. Let's just, given your ministerial background and your understanding of all of this, any victims that we've dealt with up here in Scotland, that they're key to the investigation. They're a witness in this, but they're not necessarily always treated like that. In many cases, I've found that they've been charged initially with some form of crime. And so, what's your thoughts on all of this then?
Well, I think that's a very real problem. I mean, initially, I mentioned just now that I started from a ministerial point of view when under Tony Blair and then Gordon Brown, that initially the whole focus was on criminal investigation. It was about a police response and about a legal response and how we prosecute the perpetrators. But increasingly, people have understood or seem to understand the importance of victims, and that if you are going to prosecute and bring the traffickers, which is what we all want, to justice, then the victims are key. But sometimes we say that, and the research demonstrates that, and the evidence demonstrates that. And the frustration appears sometimes is that when the victims do come forward, exactly as you say, they may actually, as a force, been forced into some sort of criminality. And we're not talking about, very serious crime, but certainly sometimes some minor offence, whether it be an immigration offence or whether it be something like that. And they're in that, and they themselves are then treated as the criminal. I'll come on to county lines, which is, even more difficult. And I, at the end of the day, if we want these people to come forward, they have to be confident that they're going to be treated in a way which understands the circumstances in which they've been trafficked or enslaved. They're often in a situation where they don't have free will. They don't have the choice in which you and I would understand it. And the evidence that they give is really the only way in which often you're going to be able to bring the traffickers to justice. And yet, if those victims feel that they're going to be treated as criminals themselves, why are they going to come forward and be a witness? Why are they going to come forward and help the authorities? And the answer is they won't. And again, we may come on to the latest bill in front of Parliament, the Nationality and Borders Bill. That makes it even worse because they're going to be penalised under these new trafficking information notices or immigration notices. They're going to be penalised for late compliance. It's not the real world. It's not where people are at. And the late compliance, assuming therefore if people come forward to the authorities in a way which beyond a certain timescale is ridiculous and not the real world.
So then let's, a couple of points you've raised there. And the first point is you touched on there talking about the victims, is that, experience would suggest that a victim of trafficking or modern slavery, they don't realise that they're a victim. They don't know they're a victim. It's like, my understanding is that, or, having met many of them, is that at the time of their exploitation, for example, they don't know, they can't put their hand up and say, this is happening to me, because they don't know. So as you've just mentioned there, if they don't know, how do they actually put their hand up and become a victim? And if they're going to be treated as a criminal initially, the fear of actually, if they probably do realise something's wrong, the fear of actually being caught and punished for it outweighs the positivity of actually raising their hand and saying, help me, please. Would that ring about right in how you feel about it?
No, that's absolutely right. And I mean, it's both of those circumstances are true. There are circumstances in which people are tricked, are duped, are put into slavery in a way or trafficked in a way which they're unaware of, taken advantage of, or it's implied the prospect of a better life is held up in front of them, all of those sorts of things. And then before they know where they've arrived, they may even, in some circumstances, have arrived legally, and then their passport's taken from them, etc., etc. So it's all of those circumstances. But the fundamental point that has to be understood is that these people, whether in whatever circumstances, whether labour exploitation, whether sexual exploitation, they're forced into that situation, whether it's duped or into it or whether forced into it, but they are the victims, and the law has to treat them as such, both as deserving individuals of the support of the state in its broadest sense of the word, but also if they are going to work with the authorities as we would want them to do, they have to be sure of their right to stay, their immigrant, their status, the fact that they're not going to be treated as criminals, and then they'll work with the authorities in order to bring people to justice. But I find it frustrating sometimes because if you talk to police generally or talk to the National Crime Agency or others, of course they'll say this is what we do. But the reality for many victims is that isn't what happens, and they find themselves in a situation where where they aren't treated as victims, they're treated as criminals. And of course they only have to be concerned about that happening for them not to come forward anyway.
Not to report it. And again, which is where, as a citizen, my journey and all of this, initially seeing some of the numbers of, and they can vary, up to 30,000 in the UK. But, if there's that type of figure is really out there, there's people in these circumstances right now, very close to where we all are. You might be in London just now, might be in Glasgow, but it's happening right across the UK. And they're in those circumstances. There's a fear of actually coming forward because they're going to get punished. And that's I suppose a policing stance or a UK legislation stance, or we'll probably move on to then, because, Vernon, I'll probably think about this in my head, and I find it quite hard to digest, is that, in the past I've met some of the victims who have who are going through or come through the asylum process, and by the nature of our society now, let's just cut to the chase. We're in post-Brexit, so if you're a non-UK citizen and you don't have eligibility to work in the UK and you're working here illegally, right? So if you've come here for whatever purposes and you end up in an asylum process, the attraction to work when you're not allowed to work, when you're only given that very small amount of money, of £38, £39 a week to live off, the attraction to work's always going to be there. So when they're going through the asylum process, there's a risk there. And I see that as a big risk factor across the UK. And Brexit's made that more apparent. It's made it a bigger problem, in my view. But it probably leads me on to ask you, you mentioned about the Nationality and Borders Bill, and this has been a very contentious piece of legislation that's passed through the UK Parliament. Ex-parliamentarian, somebody sitting in the House of Lords just now, when I mean ex-parliamentarian in the House of Commons, yes, now in the Lords. I mean, can you, for the people that are listening or watching, could you give them a little bit of an overview of what this legislation is and what it means, please?
Well, the Nationality and Borders Bill, quite rightly, Sean, as you say, it's gone through the House of Commons. It's now in the House of Lords, and we'll seek to amend that and change that as it goes through. I mean, we voted against. We voted against the bill at third reading, but anyway, it's passed and it's in the House of Lords. But it makes fundamental changes to. There's a whole part of the bill which, for people watching this podcast, may be interested. It's part 5 of the Nationality and Borders Bill, but it makes fundamental changes. So if I just talk about to the asylum system, to refugee status, and the government are basically going to create categories of refugee. They're going to talk about legal and illegal immigration, and the whole immigration, asylum, refugee, people who are trafficked, all gets wrapped up in a confused morass of rhetoric. But if you cut to the chase, just to give a couple of points from it. I mean, if you enter illegally, and the government are going to talk about that in terms of the mode of entry. So if you come in illegally, in other words, obviously we've seen a lot with the boats. I mean, a lot of those people are automatically going to be assumed as people who should be returned, rather than looking at them coming and judging their asylum claim. But also, for example, they're going to be required, if they say they've been the victims of trafficking, they're going to have to fill in these trafficking information notices. And those trafficking information notices, if they don't do that within a certain period of time, they're going to be disqualified from being able to claim that they're victims of modern slavery and trafficking. I mean, that just doesn't, it's just nonsensical when it comes to, the trauma that victims will have suffered. People are also going to be excluded. And the Independent Commissioner herself raises, people are also going to be excluded from being regarded as as victims of trafficking if they've any criminal record of any sort, any criminal offence of any sort, and that is hugely drawn. So it's not for very serious crimes. It could be for trivial matters. And again, as we talked about earlier in this podcast, the victims, many of them will have been in situations where they've been forced into minor illegality, or a situation where there's been minor infringements of the law. They will automatically be excluded. So the whole situation that the Nationality and Borders Bill creates is in reality the awful term, the hostile environment. And for many of those people, it's horrific. It is worth pointing out at this point as well, Sean, that if you take the national referral mechanism, obviously the mechanism to which victims are referred. 47% of those were children. In the last year, of the over 10,300, 47% of those were children. The bill makes no distinction between adults and children, which beggars belief, frankly. And the other point, of those over 10,300, 34% were British.
Wow.
It's not that. I mean, the change in the way in which we need to view trafficking and modern slavery has to understand that, particularly with the rise of so-called county lines type gang activity and the exploitation of young people there, internal trafficking, internal modern slavery is an increasing problem in Scotland. It's an increasing problem in England, Wales, right across the UK.
So, I mean, that's just a really good point you're talking about here, because this is children, this is county lines, and I think many people listening and watching will have an understanding of county lines, but Vernon, you have an in-depth knowledge of this. You've campaigned on this, and good, just for the benefit of everybody listening, could you give a little bit of a description of this, because it's UK-wide, isn't it? So,
yeah, essentially it's where drug gangs use children to take drugs into to other areas, and they use them as mules, essentially, to take them into, and they establish those lines. And the lines are often, referred to as, mobile phone lines, and they phone in and the drug is taken out to them. Or in some places you find cuckolded in, where sort of flats are taken over and used for the purposes of the distribution of drugs. But essentially, it's a supply line of drugs out of what you might call the areas where people have traditionally said drugs would be, and to move them out. And young people have been used as the way in which those drugs are transported, often into areas that in the past have not had them. And it's a way of doing that. And they use and exploit children on the basis and the assumption that they'll be less likely to be stopped by the authorities if they do that. But there's increasing numbers of children doing that. Increasing numbers of children are enslaved in that respect. And it's a shocking new development, or relatively new development.
And just to clarify for me here, Vernon, this is like in exploitation in any shape or form, there's a weakness that's being exploited, the gangmaster, the criminality behind it. And when it comes to this type of situation within county lines, these gangs are looking for children that there's a vulnerability in them, whatever it may be, their social status, their family circumstances, how they're getting on in school. Is that fair to say?
No, that's as always, the vulnerable, the disorganized is the polite term. That sort of individual has little structure to their lives, are exploited. Not totally. There are examples of where that isn't the case, but often that is the case. And and across the UK, the police are very well aware of it. The National Crime Agency. There's a lot of work being done by everyone to do something about it. But it's fair to say it's an increasing phenomenon, and the number of children involved is truly shocking. And as I say, it's something that when we talk about trafficking, we have to understand that a lot of the victims now are young British people, which is something that I've often thought of trafficking as people being brought in from abroad from Vietnam or from Eastern Europe or wherever, brought in, forced to work, on the fields or in cannabis farms, or brought in for sexual exploitation. And of course that's true. But alongside that, now we have the increasing phenomena of internal trafficking of British children within the UK.
And I think, that's there's some points there that you've made that can ring through in many people's heads, but that's even prior to Brexit, we saw the increase in victims of human trafficking or victims of modern slavery. We saw a significant increase in UK nationals being used. And again, for the similar, exactly what you just talked about with regards to the children in county lines, these were vulnerable adults that were being used for the exploitation of labour. So you can't hide from, you're absolutely right, hiding from the fact by this perception in society that these victims are all UK nationals. They don't speak English. They don't understand. Yes, that's a traditional version, and that's not gone away. But you have people who speak our language. That's the simplest way to put it. Their first language is English, and they're being increasingly exploited.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, you mentioned Brexit, and I mean, just another phenomenon. I mean, obviously Scotland was very pro-Remain and anti-leaving the EU. I was very pro staying in the EU as well. But it just leaving that to one side, what is really frustrating is that the government have not negotiated new international agreements to replace the international agreements that have been lost because of Brexit, and that does make it more difficult. I mean, you can't, if you want to solve the phenomena of boats coming across the English Channel, you can't do that by shouting at the French. It's just you have to work with them, and that's the reality of the situation. And we seem to think, the wicked French, whereas they have a problem across Europe, indeed across globally. There are issues around migration, trafficking, and the boring fact is that these issues can be dealt with as well as we can, but only by nations working together, and that's internally, but externally as well. And whatever the rights and wrongs of Brexit, and I thought it was a bad thing to happen, the fact is that there's no, as I say, international cooperation that has taken place. And the other thing that doesn't help with the whole debate is, from the UK government's perspective, is this idea that it's only the UK that have this problem. It's only the UK that have to deal with trafficked individuals or asylum seekers or refugees, a whole lot conflated together. It's a very real problem across Europe, and a very real problem indeed across the world. And it is something that we all need to respond to in a way which is consistent with the human rights values that our nation has.
And there's you talk about that's, I can disagree with anything that you've said there, Vernon. It's we're in a situation where the decision to leave the EU has been made. We're here, I'm not going to, talk about the politics behind it all, but the frustrations that have come with that, and in the sectors that, when I put my business head on, that we see labour shortages across the UK. I look, more specifically at Scotland, and I see also see that there seems to be a rise in criminality. And if I'm being really brutal, what we see on the ground, or our team does see on the ground, is that people are bringing workers to come and get registered and try and work at some of the businesses that we supply. But the red flags of somebody who's been exploited for the labour are all coming up, and far more often than they would have done before. And that to me means that there's criminality behind, there's criminality going, okay, there's a labour shortage, I can get you people. And it's the blind eye theory that, when a business actually goes, okay, I'm desperate, I'm just not going to look, and I know that's going to happen. And I'm fairly certain it's already been happening over the last 12 months or so. So we do see some of the after effects directly affecting the labour supply, as in the negative is that there's many less workers out there, but what we're seeing is that criminality behind it is actually is taking advantage of it, and I can only see that getting worse really from the front line here, which is quite
I mean, look, the labour exploitation is a very real issue, and Brexit has made some of the opportunity for that, created a greater opportunity for that. But I know that you and Scotland Against Slavery, the work that you've been doing, you've been working with businesses, and it's fair to say that the vast majority of businesses, the vast majority of businessmen and women, will work hard to tackle that. But of course, there is always that opportunity for those who would seek to exploit others. And I think one of the opportunities and chances for us is in the national effort that's made. And I know again that you work with businesses. The national effort that's made involves businesses as well as involving voluntary organisations, government, local authorities. Businesses have a responsibility, and from my experience. It's not just big businesses, but many of the small businesses, certainly the farms, the rural communities, the businesses there, that working with them can actually be part and is a major part of the solution as well. And I've seen that here working from London, and I know you in Glasgow and beyond, you'll have seen that as well. I know you've got a business forum, I think, at which you work closely with businesses to spread that message. And they have a responsibility as well, and I think the majority accept that, to look out for the signs of that as well.
Fantastic. Lord Vernon Coaker, inspirational and insightful conversation. You know, take away anything about our UK government, the Scottish Parliament, devolved nations. You know, I think as we said right at the start, this is cross-party. This is just about unity. I think there's some political issues that we've discussed, including the Nationalities and Borders Bill, which is, you know, a huge topic, and it's very, very warming to hear of the work that you're doing in the House of Lords with regards to this piece of legislation, which is very, very positive on something that's quite frightening. That's that we could see getting passed. But you've been a real insight and a real open book. And it's I must say, I've met many politicians now over the last few years, and you're one that I'd love to keep in touch with, and I follow with great intent, and I'm sure many of the listeners and viewers will be the same. So Lord Vernon Coaker, thank you very much for taking part.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck to the work that you do, and particularly the work and the focus you have in Scotland, but across the UK and beyond. We'll all make our efforts to do what we can to support the victims and bring the traffickers to justice. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.